Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Nazir. We're up to Perek Tet, Mishnah Aleph. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha Yisraelov, Chana bat Miriam, and Sason ben Raya, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Le'avdil ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betor Shah Cholei Yisrael. The Mishnah teaches who besides a Jewish man can become a Nazir. Hagoim en lem Nizirut. Non-Jews do not have Nizirut, and even if a non-Jew makes a vow of Nizirut, he does not have to keep the laws of Nizirut. Now, the verse at the beginning of the Nazir passage in Bamidbar, chapter 6, verse 2, says explicitly, "Speak to the children of Israel. Although non-Jews can make vows to donate offerings to the temple, they cannot become Nizirim." Nashim va'avadim yesh lan nizirut. Women and Canaan slaves owned by Jews have nizirut, meaning they can become nizirim. Women are explicitly included in the nizirut laws, as the verse says over there in Bamidbar chapter 6 verse 2. If a man or a woman will vow clearly a vow of nizirut, etc., that shows us that women are included in the laws of nizirut explicitly. A Canaanite slave owned by a Jew is considered to be partially converted, and he is subject to most mitzvot, all the mitzvot that women must keep. A verse teaches that he is also subject to Nizirut, as the Gemara says in Masechet Nazir, page 61a. Now, we have learned previously that a husband may cancel his wife's Nizirut. A master may also compel his slave to violate his Nizirut restrictions if these interfere with the slave's ability to serve his master properly. These two laws, however, are very different, as the Mishnah will now explain. Chomer banashimi ba'avadim. There is something more strict about women who become Nazirim than slaves who become Nazirim. Shu chofet avdo, because a master can force his Nazir slave to drink wine or become tameh if this interferes with the slave's service to his master. For example, if a slave will not be fully healthy unless he drinks wine, or if he needs to do work in a place where he will become tameh, his master can force him to do so. And the commentaries point out drinking wine was thought to contribute to good health. Now, usually, if a slave makes a vow that would make him unable to serve his master, for instance, if he vows not to eat certain foods and will be weak as a result, the vow does not take effect at all. This is learned from a verse in the passage about Nedarim vows. However, since a verse also teaches that a slave's Nizirut vow does take effect, we must say that the Torah means that it takes effect only up to the point where it prevents him from working for his master. After that, his master may force him to violate his Nizirut. But a husband cannot force his wife to drink wine or become tameh as long as she is a Nazirah, and she must keep all the Nizirut laws even if her husband does not want her to. As long as her vow is in effect, he cannot force her to violate it. However, a husband can cancel his wife's vow, as the Mishnah will now explain. On the other hand, chomer ba'avadim mi Nashim. There is also something more strict about slaves who become Nazirim than women who become Nazirim. Shu mefer nidrei ishto, because the husband can cancel his wife's vows, and if he cancels her vow of Nazirut, she no longer has to keep it, even if he later changes his mind. The Torah gives the husband the right to cancel certain vows made by his wife on the day he hears of them, as it says in Bamidbar, chapter 30, verse 9. This applies to a vow of Nazirut as well, as the Gemara says in Nedarim, page 3a. Ve'eno mefer nidrei avdo, but a master cannot cancel his slave's vows, and even after forcing his slave to drink wine or become tameh, if he later changes his mind and wants his slave to keep the vow, the slave must keep all the laws of Nizirut. Even though the slave must listen to his master, if he tells him to violate the laws of Nizirut for the master's benefit, the vow itself is never cancelled, and the slave must keep whatever restrictions do not interfere with his service to his master. Hefer li'ishto hefer olamit. For this reason, if he cancels a vow of Nizirut for his wife, he has cancelled it forever, and even if he later dies or divorces her, she does not keep the laws of Nizirut. Hefer le'avdo yatzad echut mashlim Niziruto. However, if he cancels a vow of Nizirut for his slave, meaning he forces him not to keep the vow, the word cancels is used here in a borrowed sense. Only a wife's vow can actually be cancelled. The slave's, he can force him to not keep it. But again, in the case where he canceled the vow of Nizirut for his slave, meaning he forces him not to keep the vow, then when the slave goes free, he must finish his Nizirut, because Nizirut is still in effect. The days when his master forced him not to keep his vow do not count towards Nizirut. For example, if he vowed to be a Nazir for 30 days, but kept the laws of Nizirut on only 5 of those days, he must keep the laws of Nazirut for 25 days after he is freed. If his master never let him keep the laws of Nazirut for a full day, he must keep the laws for 30 days after he is freed. Another law about a slave who is a Nazir, avar mikneged panav. If the slave left his master's presence, meaning he ran away, there is no dispute as to whether he may drink wine. There is a dispute, there's a machloket as to whether he may drink wine. Rabbi Meir says, lo yishteh, he may not drink wine. In this way, he will go back to his master sooner, since he will not be allowed to drink wine unless he is with his master. Although not drinking wine may weaken the slave, Rabbi Meir considers it a greater benefit to the master to forbid the Nazir slave to drink wine, so that he will feel deprived and want to return to his master. But Rabbi Yossi says, Yishteh, he may drink wine because his master, who will eventually find him and bring him back, wants him to drink and stay healthy. Just as a slave can be forced to drink wine while in his master's home, so too he can be permitted to drink wine even when he is away from his master, since this is in his master's best interest. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet discusses someone who concluded his Nazirut and then found out that he had become Tameh from a corpse while he was a Nazir. Nazir Shegilach, if a Nazir finished his Nazirut, brought his offerings and shaved his head, Vinodalo Shu Tameh, and then it became known to him that he had become Tameh while he was a Nazir. For example, it was later discovered that a cave he entered while he was a Nazir had contained a dead body, or a road he traveled on passed over a grave. The law is as follows. Im Tumah Yedua, if the source of the tumah was one that people could have known about, the corpse was either out in the open where it could be seen, or it was in a hidden area but someone knew it was there, soter, it causes him to forfeit all the days he observed, and he must start his Nazirut over again. Therefore, he must first become tahor, shave, bring the offerings for tumah, and then start his Nazirut over again, like we discussed earlier in chapter 6, Mishnayot 5 and 6. Vim tumata tahom. But if the source was a tumah of the deep, meaning a source of tumah that nobody knew about, it is called a tumah of the deep because, like the depths, it is not in the open where people can see it, such as a body that unknown to anyone was trapped under a pile of rubble. And no soter, it does not cause him to forfeit the days he observed, and he does not have to start his Nazirut over again. This is a halacha Moshe Sinai. Even though he becomes tameh from the unknown corpse and must purify himself, he does not need to observe his Nazirut again or bring tumah offerings, since the source of his tumah was unknown to anyone. Now, the rule we just learned applies where he did not become aware of his tumah until after he shaved. The Mishnah now gives the law for the case where he discovered the tumah before he shaved. Im ad shelo gilach. However, if he found out about the tumah before he shaved his head, even if he already finished his Nazirut and brought his offerings, ben kach u ben kach soter, then whether it was a known tumah or whether it was a tumah of the deep, it causes him to forfeit his Nazirut and start over again. The Halacha Moshe Sinai was said only in regard to tumah discovered after he shaved. Tumah discovered before he shaved is treated like any other tumah and causes him to forfeit his Nazirut. Our Mishnah follows the view of the first Tana in chapter 6, Mishnah 9, who holds that the Nazirut restrictions do not end until the entire concluding ritual, including shaving, is completed. The Mishnah illustrates and elaborates this law, Ketzad Hauso, Yiran Litbol B'me'ara, if he went down into a cave while he was a Nazir to immerse in a mikvah. The Mishnah refers to someone who had become tameh for some other reason than contact with a dead body. He wanted to become tahor by immersing in the water in the cave. V'nimtza met saf al pi ha'me'ara, and an olive's volume of a corpse was later found floating at the entrance to the cave, and we do not know whether he touched it or not. Tameh, he is tameh, even if he does not find out about the corpse flesh until after he had finished his Nazirut and shaved. He must start his Nazirut over again because the object that made him tameh was in the open and people could have known about it. The special law of tumah of the deep does not apply in this case. Therefore, although it is a question whether he touched a piece of corpse, he is considered definitely tameh because of another rule that says that a doubt about tumah in a private area is considered to be tameh. Nimtza mishuka bekalka me'ara, but if a corpse was found sunken in the floor of the cave and nobody knew it was there, apparently someone had drowned there and his body had become trapped at the bottom of the cave, but nobody knew about it, it is considered a tumah of the deep. If the Nazir does not find out about this until after he shaved, the law is as follows. Yiran le'aker, if he had gone down into the cave in order to cool off in the water, tahor, he is tahor, meaning he does not have to repeat his Nazirut, because it is a tumah of the deep, like the Mishnah said earlier. Even though he became tameh by passing over the dead body and must now become tahor, he does not need to start his Nazirut again. This law applies no matter why he went down to the cave, as long as he was not already tameh from a corpse, like the Mishnah will state next. The Mishnah speaks of a case where he went there to cool off, to teach that even though he did not go there to purify himself, and therefore was not careful about checking for tameh objects, he is still tahor and does not have to start his Nazirut again. Leit taher mitumat met. However, if he had gone down into the cave because he was tameh from a corpse, and he needed to become ta'ol from tumah of the dead by immersing in the mikveh, someone who is tameh from a corpse needs to receive the 2 sprinklings of purification water on the 3rd and 7th days of his tumah, and then immerse in the mikveh to complete his purification. Tameh, he is tameh. He must repeat his nazirut even though it is a tumah of the deep. For example, if he started a term of nazirut after he immersed in the mikveh, thinking he was no longer tameh, he needs to repeat all the days he observed since he was tameh from the body sunken in the cave. Shechizkat tameh tameh v'chizkat ta'or ta'or. This is because it is assumed that someone who is already tameh remains tameh, and that someone who is ta'or remains ta'or. Sha'aglaim ladavar, because the matter has legs to stand on, meaning because it is logical to assume that Halacha Moshe Sinai about tumah of the deep was said only in regard to someone who was ta'or at that time, not in regard to someone who was already tameh from a corpse and trying to become ta'or from it. The reason the law about tumah of the deep applies only to someone who is ta'or is because that is the way it was taught to Moshe at Sinai. The Mishnah is only saying that it is logical to assume that this was the way the halacha was said. Now, in summary, when a nazir becomes tameh from a tumah of the deep, he does not need to repeat his nazirut. However, this applies only if 2 things are true. A, he does not find out that he had already become tameh until after he had already finished his nazirut by shaving. And B, at the time he came in contact with the unknown corpse, he was not already tameh with corpse tumah. And that is Rabbotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.